Happy Father's Day. That was pretty weak, but that's how you feel, that's how you feel. All right. So I came in this morning. There's a story about my shirt. If you can't read it, it says Papa, the man, the myth, the legend. It's me. I told Debbie I was wearing it. I sprung it on her about 11 o'clock last night because I really didn't want her to know till then. And so we both agreed I probably shouldn't wear it in the first service. So I wore my other shirt. But then I walk in, and Cliff has flip-flops on. I'm all with you. So I do want you to know one thing, Cliff. Even in the first service, I had no socks on. So I kind of got my way. Thank you for turning that up. Are you new at this? Just kidding. I want to share something with you this morning from a lady named Irma Bombeck. Who remembers Irma Bombeck? Now you are old. She was a comedian, a writer, poet, stand-up comic, and had a space between her front teeth you could stick your index finger in. She was just an incredibly gracious and funny, smart woman. So this isn't particularly scriptural, but she kind of made it sound like that. It's entitled, When God Created Fathers. And I've had this for, I don't know, long time. Don't even remember where I got it. But it goes like this. When the good Lord was creating fathers, he started with a tall frame. And a female angel nearby says, "What kind of father is that? If you're going to make children so close to the ground, why have you put fathers up so high? He won't be able to shoot marbles without kneeling, tuck a child in bed without bending, or even kiss a child without a lot of stooping." God smiled and said, "Yes, but if I make him child-sized, who would children have to look up to?" And when God made the father's hands, they were large and sinewy. And the angel shook her head sadly and says, "Do you know what you're doing? Large hands are clumsy. They can't manage diaper pins, small buttons, rubber bands on ponytails, or even remove splinters caused by baseball bats." God smiled and said, "I know, but they're large enough to hold everything a small boy empties out of his pockets at the end of the day, yet small enough to cup a child's face." And then God molded long, slim legs and broad shoulders. I got half of that, by the way. The angel nearly had a heart attack. "Boy, this is the end of the week, all right," she clucked. "Do you realize you just made a father without a lap? How is he going to pull a child close to him without a kid falling between his legs?" And God smiled and said, "A mother needs a lap. A father needs strong shoulders to pull a sled, balance a boy on a bicycle, or hold a sleepy young lady's head on the way home from the circus." God was in the middle of creating two of the largest feet anyone had ever seen when the angel could contain herself no longer. That is just not fair. Do you honestly think that those large boots are going to dig out of bed early in the morning when the baby cries? Or walk through a small birthday party without crushing at least 3 guests? And God smiled and said, "They'll work, you'll see. They'll support a small child who wants to ride a horse to Banbury Cross, or scare off mice at the summer cabin, or display shoes that will be a challenge someday to fill." God worked throughout the night, giving the father a few words but a firm, authoritative voice, eyes that saw everything but remained calm and tolerant. Finally, almost as an afterthought, he added tears. Then he turned to the angel and said, "Now you're satisfied that he can love as much as a mother?" The angel shutteth up. Thank you, Irma. It's Father's Day, one of my favorite days of the year. The last time I preached here was on Palm Sunday, Holy Week. And I started out by whining a bit about having to preach on the darkest week of the Christian year. So Wade threw me a bone and is letting me fill in for him today on Father's Day. I brought my favorite shirt, 3 of my favorite ties. Now, those of you who have been around for a while will remember Marge Klingensmith's 3-year-old class down at the end of the hall. Melanie, Joshua, and Maynell, in order of appearance, made these for me when they were 3, so that makes them 38, 36, and 33 years old, the ties, not the kids. I've kept them all these years, and I don't know if they'll bury them with me or put them in the bottom of a bird cage or what they'll do when I'm gone, but as long as I'm around, they're sticking with me. My favorite ties, and my favorite shirt. Later today, I'll be traveling to Orlando, Florida for a meeting for the next couple of days. I'm going to proudly wear this shirt in the airports in Indianapolis, Atlanta, and Orlando, and about 11:30 tonight when I stumble into the Hilton Hotel in Orlando, I'll still have it on. And I hope everyone asks me about it, because I'll tell them. It's not what I am, it's who I am. I know several of you out there know exactly what I'm talking about. I am a very simple man. I started preparation for this sermon by sending out a short survey to about 40 of my friends and acquaintances. Almost none were from this church, and none shared DNA with me. Didn't think that would be fair. I received 21 responses with some very interesting data, which I will share some of as we unpack the sermon this morning. The title is Good Dad, Bad Dad, No Dad. First of all, how did I land on such a catchy title? I believe that God speaks to us the way He built us. He built me with, they used to call it attention deficit disorder, and then as an adult it's AADD. Now mine is old man attention deficit disorder. I've gone through all 3 phases. But that's what I have, and that's how He speaks to me. So when I was conversing and thinking, I think in bursts. I don't think linearly. It just bam, bam, bam. Some people say that when John wrote Revelation, some people said he wrote it linearly. This happened and this happened. Other people say he used more of the Eastern mind. And, oh, I saw this. So, oh, there's guys flying around, and there's this, and there's this. And there's this. That's kind of the way I think. So when I was thinking about this, all of a sudden, He just laid on me, good dad, bad dad, no dad. And so I said, all right, now what do I do with that? So I worked my way through that, and that's where we end up this morning. If you know me, I'm very much a 3 points and a story guy when I preach. I like that because if I do 3 points, you can generally remember 3 things, and then maybe you remember a little bit about what I said on each point. Maybe. We all wish for a good dad, right? Nobody wants a bad dad. Some of us have or had actually a good dad. But there are others who have not had this blessing. They've had bad dads or no dad at all. Let me be clear. In no case is the child ever to be blamed. Never. One of the characteristics of children who have less than optimal dads is that they blame themselves. Because after all, they just can't reason why any dad would naturally be good. They don't understand. Matter of fact, I don't understand it. So they tumble to that conclusion. It must be their fault, much like a child does when their parents get split up or get divorced. A lot of kids, if I were a better kid, if they loved me more, they wouldn't allow this to happen. Been through that, done it, didn't get a t-shirt, but if they had one, I would have had it on. So let me share with you the questions I ask my friends and acquaintances. I'll ask them relatively slowly so that you can maybe answer them for yourselves. And then as we go through each of these scenarios, you listen for phrases and words and things that remind you of your dad or that you hope will remind your children of you, Dad. Question number 1, into which category would you place your dad? Good dad, bad dad, or no dad? What 3 words would you use to describe your dad? How many dads have you had? What was your relationship like with your dad growing up? If in fact you ever grew up. What's it like today? How often do you speak to your dad? How are you most like him? If your dad's deceased, what would you most like to tell him? What was your dad's spiritual influence on your life? Is that my problem? Do I need to slide this to the middle more? All right. I've got more chins in the Chinese phone book, so I'm trying not to scrape it all day long. All right, let's try this, if this is better. Dad number 1. Into which category? Good dad. The first 8 or 9 are good dads. What 3 words? Honest, hardworking, and a strong faith. How many dads have you had? 1 biological father and several mentor-type dads. What was your relationship with your father when you were growing up? I respected my dad completely. I envied his skills with carpentry tools and his ability to build just about anything, large or small. He always told me like it was. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad always provided for our needs, both physically and spiritually. Now let's take a quick time out here. When I do funerals for men and for women, but this is more of a man thing, I ask the deceased family, and in many cases their children, give me words to describe your dad. And the one that, until this, drove me crazy was, he was a good provider. Now at the end of my days, I would like for my kids to put that somewhere on my list down about 9 or 10. But I don't want that to be at the top. There's a whole bunch of other things I hope I am before I'm that. But the way this guy said it was, he provided for all our needs, physically and spiritually. So he hooked them together for me. I like the way he did that. This particular respondent helped clear that up for me when he added the spiritual word. What's it like today? I miss my dad. He's gone. And just having the ability to speak to him for counsel and advice would be great. How often did you speak with him? Prior to his death, I visit him at least weekly. How are you most like him? I'm told I look like him. I remember his admonition that any job worth doing is a job worth doing right, and try to follow that concept. I strive to maintain a character that would reflect the high standards of behavior and morals my father held. Your dad's gone. What would you like most to tell him? Thanks for all the common sense guidance in life and for teaching me skills and working with my hands and mind. And thanks for always pushing me to do my best. What was your dad's spiritual influence on you? I was reared in a Christian home, attending church services twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday evening, so he was obviously over 60 years old. We're always involved in the activities of the church, where my mother and father were both active in the leadership. That influenced me to continue regular church attendance and provide a model for both of our children as they began being reared in our home. We continue to be active members of our church today. Now, by any measuring stick, that was a good dad. Person number 2 has a different twist. My dad was both, actually. Overall, I would say he was a good dad. His intentions were always good, but he was an alcoholic. One in denial. He was a funny alcoholic most of the time. He had several DUIs, including one the week before I got married. He always promised he would quit, but the power of the alcohol won every time. He could be embarrassing, and on top of that, he was a worry when he didn't come home. What 3 words? Loving, hardworking, and funny. She saw through his weaknesses. How many dads has she had? Just one. Tell me about the relationship growing up. Good most of the time. His drinking worried me, and I would become angry with him as I got older. I finally realized that he wasn't strong enough to beat his addiction. I could count on him, unless he was drinking, and he might forget. I knew he loved me in the very best way that he knew how to love. What a mature attitude. He had 7 brothers and sisters and grew up extremely poor. He moved out of the south side of Muncie area so we would have a better life away from the drugs, language, and bad influence of his family. Now, that's not to say that the south side of Muncie is wrong or has anything wrong with it. That particular family lived there. He moved his family away from them to get them away from that influence. He always worked 2 to 3 jobs to make sure we had what we needed for school or extras, like being on the golf team. He rarely said no and always would find a way to make it work. He was a very giving man and hardly wanted anything for himself. I lost my dad in March of 2009. He was a wonderful grandpa to all of his kids. How are you most like him? I am a pleaser and giving like him. Sometimes I have his funny nature, and I work very hard at whatever I do. Your dad's gone. What would you most like to say to him? How much I miss him, even after all this time and love, and I love him. I am sure he knew that, but we didn't say it very often. I wish I would have listened to his stories more intently and learned more about his family life. This is where it gets a little interesting. What was his spiritual influence? I know he believed in God, but we didn't talk about it, nor did my parents go to church. I would go with friends when I was growing up. And to that I would add, this lady is a committed Christian today. Not because of her biological parents, but because of those other moms and dads that came into her life. We have another good dad. The 3 words were dedicated to family. How many dads have you had? 3. My biological father, my father-in-law, and my heavenly father. What was your relationship like with your dad growing up? It was great. He was always there for me and did whatever he could to provide for our family. Things were tough for a while, but he was constant with his love and commitment towards me and the rest of the family. Today, my dad and I have grown even closer. We've been through a lot together, and the bond is tighter than it ever has been. I speak to Dad 4 or 5 times a week. I'd like to think I'm an avid family man like him, an avid family man. Also, Dad is a man of integrity, and I like to think that I have that trait as well. Spiritual influence. Dad really had no spiritual influence in my life. My grandpa was the one that really got my spiritual life going. Like my dad, he was a great man also. Here's another good dad. 3 words. Hard-working man. What was the relationship like growing up? It was a close one. We went to races, baseball games, went fishing and hunting. He supported my sport activities and music as well. And by music, this person was in a rock band. That's the music that was supported. Still a good relationship today. He's always there when I need him. I'd speak to him every 2 or 3 weeks. How are you most like him? Taking care of my family is top priority. What was your dad's spiritual influence on your life? Early on, it was non-existent, but it has become more influential ever since he was baptized. I can now see the difference that Jesus has made in his life. Here's a good dad. What 3 words? Professional, servant, and unconditional. He's had 2 dads, his own father and his paternal grandfather. The relationship with his dad growing up was in many ways very close, like a friend. He was also my biggest supporter, but he was an old-school authoritarian. Today, they have a close, respectful relationship of quiet love. He sees his dad every few days. How are you most like him? Short-tempered, unable to relax and be laid back. His dad wasn't dead, but here's what he said about him. That I better understand that his success in life is not about his professional experiences, which I can tell you is quite long, but his marriage and the home he built for us. That I am what I am because of him. Spiritual influence. Like other aspects of his life, it's rare he discusses something emotional and personal, but he lived out of a quiet commitment to our church and Christian values. And here's the last good one I'll share. Strong, fun, and loving. How many dads have you had? 3. My dad, who died when I was 10. Every single police officer on the local police force. My 5th grade English teacher who helped me navigate through 5th grade fresh from the loss of my dad. He made it okay to ask questions, to cry, and to just be me. And my stepdad, my current dad. He's a loving man to my mother and a great life experience coach. What was your relationship to your dad like when you were growing up before he passed? Dad and I were very close. He used to call me his sidekick. My dad was a police officer, fireman, and owned his own radio communications business. I went to work with my dad on weekends and have fond memories of the smells of fire and police stations. The smells today bring back so many memories. Two of our favorite pastimes were fishing, watching Star Trek. If your dad was alive, what would you say to him today? I'm sure I'd want to tell him where I've been in life and how much his strength and love and actions impacted who I am today. But mostly, I would just like to stand silent and hold him and listen to him talk to me. I want to go to the bad dad, no dad section. My dad was around. This is a bad dad, no dad. My dad was around but unavailable, completely unavailable. So I might say no dad. What three words describe this no dad? Selfish, self-involved, and unaware. How many dads have you had? Some of you can relate to this. As a young man, my maternal grandfather was my father figure. He did things with me and read to me from the Bible. He also disciplined me. I attended college in Ellensburg, where my grandmother's brother became a father figure. He wanted to do things with me and teach me how to do things. After college, my first real job was with a guy who became a father figure. He taught me about perseverance, positive thinking, and hard work. So I would say I had three dads. What was your relationship like with your father growing up? When Dad came home, he had dinner and listened to his stereo. He refused to do anything with me. I've never played a game with my father. He was prone to angry outbursts and physical abuse. What's it like today? This is a no dad, remember? My father calls me every day to tell me what he has heard on a podcast. This is nice, but the conversation revolves completely around him. If I mention anything going on in my life or the lives of my daughters, he announces he has to go. I guess it's better than nothing. I'm not sure I guess that at all. But how often do you speak to your no dad? Every day. So just being around doesn't count for much if you're not in the present with your children. How are you most like him? We both like to be alone. Social interaction is difficult. Spiritual influence from this no dad? We were at church every Sunday. But I do not recall my father ever praying other than meals. I don't remember him ever reading his Bible. Here's the last one. No dad. Absent, selfish, and loved. How many dads have you had? I have my biological father, a stepfather, then fathers of friends who have stepped up and shown me the example of a great father. What was your relationship with your dad growing up? Non-existent. My parents were divorced when I was 2, and he moved out of state. Out of state, out of mind. No calls, no cards, no nothing. Randomly showed up when I was 14, to which I walked across the floor in the living room, past him, sitting on the sofa, oblivious to who I was, to go complete my homework in my room. What's it like today? One-sided at best. I found peace and granted forgiveness. Notice those two things go together. Forgiveness and peace. Can't have one without the other. I have found peace and granted forgiveness for his lack of attendance in my life thus far. Thus far. She still has hope. However, to this day, it is still only a true relationship on his time and not mine. How often do you speak to your dad? Maybe 4 times a year. Sadly, my sister had to plug my birthday into his phone so he'd finally get it right. How are you most like him? This no dad is a people person. Imagine that. Some say we never met a stranger, except maybe his daughter. He's not deceased, but here's what you'd like to tell him. He's very much alive, but just as any other day that passes, I wish to tell him thank you for giving me life. Thank you for choosing my mother. Thank you for allowing me to have an amazing extended family. Most importantly, I forgive you for the choices you make in regards to our ongoing lack of a relationship. I love you through the years and tears and fears. Spiritual influence. He has proven himself to be a lousy earthly father. However, I have grown through my life experience to know my Father in heaven loves me unconditionally and stands firm by my side no matter what. That's the list I'm going to share with you this morning. I know for a fact some people didn't respond because I know enough about them because it might have just been too painful. I'm going to close with two stories. One's about my dad. I've talked about other people's dad. You might as well know about mine. His name is John Daniel Gregg. He died at age 74. My dad was all three. Bad dad, good dad, no dad. I didn't realize this until I was preparing his funeral and writing his eulogy. For the first time in my life, I took a long look at his life. He was from a family of 10, raised in a 2-bedroom home during the Depression. How many in here can relate to that? Maybe some, I don't know, not many. I certainly couldn't. He told me once that they always sat down to dinner with food on his plate, but many nights he got up hungry. I've never gotten up hungry once in my life, not once. He married my mother just prior to World War II breaking out. He enlisted in the Navy and was shipped to Okinawa. My mother was pregnant with my sister, Judith Marlene Gregg, when he left, and she was 11 months old the first time he saw her. I was present at all three of my kids' births. I never had to go through that agony of waiting 11 months. When he returned from the war, they waited 7 more years to have child number 2. Richard Calvin Gregg was stillborn on November 1st, 1951. My dad blamed himself for my brother's death and began drinking. He became a functioning alcoholic, never got fired from a job, never got picked up, no DUI. And by the time I came along, 2 years later, their marriage was on the rocks. They finally separated when I was 5 and divorced when I was 6. I asked both of them in later years, if my brother had lived, would I have ever been born? And they both said, no. Now, you can take that one of two ways. I've always taken it that makes me special. But my glass is just half full. That's just the way I think. So my brother died that gave me earthly life. Jesus died that gave me eternal life. I am doubly blessed. And I remember that each day as I walk through life. You're here for a purpose. You're here for a reason. You're living for other people. Because divorce was so rare in the 50s, several kids in my first grade class actually asked me, is your dad still your dad? We just didn't understand. It was rare in my little town of Albany then. He continued his drinking. When I was 12 years old, he married a wonderful woman who treated me as her own. I visited her a couple of weeks ago in the nursing home, and she always introduces me as her boy or her son. No step. She told me the first time I visited their house that my dad had me before he had her, and to make yourself at home, this is your house. His 2 greatest accomplishments were the 2 women he married, I'm convinced. He was a good dad when I was with him, and we did many things that interested us both. Sports, fishing, those kinds of things. We both liked to argue, so that was even fun. But we never had a crossword. He was a bad dad because of his drinking, his behavior, and not working to keep the family together. I always felt a bit cheated. He was no dad because he wasn't there many times when I simply needed him. I can't remember ever living in the same house with him. I won't tell you this whole story, but when I was 10 years old, I was standing in my front yard, our little house in Albany, and I promised myself that my kids would never go to bed in a home where their dad didn't live. And by the grace of God and the help of a godly wife, I've kept that promise. I mentioned how I came forgiving my dad, and this is the part where I want you all to pay attention. If you have daddy issues, we've all got a little bit, I suppose. As I was writing his eulogy, I saw for the first time his life laid out in front of me. Given his past, I began to see that his life experiences interwoven with his personal weaknesses made him who he was. Good, bad, and different. The day I buried him was also the day I buried my bad feelings, my resentment, my judgmental attitude, and my disappointment in him as my dad. It was also the day that became obvious to me that if I wanted my children to judge me through that same prism of grace, I better do it for him. It seemed only fair. Unfortunately, I was never able to do that in person because he was gone. Let me encourage you today not to make the same mistake that I made. Now, don't think I wring my hands and gnash my teeth over it. I think he knew I loved him. I never told him I thought he was a bad dad, but I wish I could have shared that I knew now more than I knew. So don't do that. If your dad's still around and you've got some forgiving to do, do it. Get freed up. Have some peace in your life. If he's not here, maybe you need to go to a quiet place where the two of you used to spend a lot of time. Or a noisy place. Whatever reminds you of your dad. And have that conversation with him. It'll be very freeing. Do it. As a Quaker philosopher, David Elton Trueblood, would say, do it while it is day. I want to close with another short story. I heard this story at an FCCI, a Fellowship of Companies for Christ meeting, 20-some years ago probably. From a man who was in business with his brother. Their dad had been an atrocious dad. One day they decided to put a large portrait of him in the lobby of their business. He stopped by a few days later, and when he saw the picture, his picture, he was shocked, to say the least. He called them into the lobby and asked them why they had a picture of him. He knew he had been a bad dad. They told him simply this, that the Bible says to honor your father and your mother so that you will live long in the land. It makes no mention about how good or how spiritual or how loving or how good of a provider they've been or how many great memories you have. It doesn't say anything about that. It says honor them, period. And so that's what they did. They put a nice, well-hung portrait of their lousy dad. So I urge you this morning, maybe you need to forgive. Forget about wishing your dad was something that he's never going to be. Never going to be that. And if he's already gone, he can't change it. Dan Maddox used to say, you can sin, but you can't unsin. If he's gone, he can't make up for it. It's all on you. And my life was not as bad as probably some of yours. It was better than some. But the admonition is the same. Honor your father. Period. So as the band joins me, let me ask the question where you find yourself today in this matter of a good dad, bad dad, or no dad. And maybe more importantly, do you know where your children would put you? Maybe you should have that conversation and ask them. I don't know that, but this I do know. Your Heavenly Father can heal the wounds of a child's broken heart because this child had a broken heart till he was 40. And he healed that. He can break the chains of hurt and disappointment and restore relationships that seem doomed and destructive. But most importantly, and you said this in your prayer this morning, set you free from the chains that bind you. Your dad can't do it. Your mom can't do it. The preacher can't do it. Nobody. That's on you. You can choose from this day forward. You have no excuse. Once again, the choice is yours. My question to you is, how will you respond?